Good morning, fourth block. So I'm going to go through this packet with you about 15 minutes at a time. I've got the answer sheet that I've uploaded on Google Classroom for you, and I'm going to be typing in my copy of the answer sheet over here, and I'm going to read through the document with you. So if you are, you don't have other people to help you, you can just let me read it to you, and we'll talk through it as we go. So we're covering World War II, which the European part of America of the war is 1939 to 1945, and we become involved from December 8th, 1941 till 1945 when the war ends. Now, Pearl Harbor is attacked on December 7th, 1941, and we'll talk about that as we go through the packet. Okay, so we're going to talk about the European theater, which is the war that happened in Europe, the North African theater, which is the war that happened in North Africa, and then the Pacific theater, which is the island hopping that we do out in the Pacific Ocean with Hawaii and Guam and the Philippines and Japan and all those places. So when we talk about theater, the theater means where we have the war, like the place where we do the fighting, all right? So here it says, it's a term normally used to define a specific geographic area within which armed conflict occurs. In short, the region where the fighting takes place in a war. Okay. So what we're going to learn as we go through this packet is the causes of World War II, some definitions, allies and the leaders of World War II, how America went from being neutral to the war to becoming involved in the war, how we fought in the Pacific, the big battles and major turning points. We'll talk about the Holocaust, how women were involved in the war on the home front, and how other Americans supported the war, the effects of World War II at home, rebuilding Europe after World War II, the effects of World War II worldwide, and establishing the United Nations. Now that's going to take some time to do all that stuff, so it's not all going to be in one day. Okay, so let's read about the time period between the wars. All right. So from remember 1918 is when World War I ended and we established the Treaty of Versailles. The Treaty of Versailles was between Germany and Allied countries that established Germany's role and punishment for their part in World War I. I should say World War I. Germany was angry for being forced to accept the total blame for the war and lost land. Italy was angered by not getting as much land as they thought they deserved. Japan was insulted because of the treaty would not accept their proposed equality of the races belief. There's that social Darwinism, scientific racism coming into play. In short, the fighting stopped, but the anger still existed. The United States in the 1920s was a period where most Americans were optimistic, they felt good about the country's future. Business was good in American factories, and most people had money to spend on household conveniences and entertainment. Many Americans invested in the stock market and became wealthy. The 1920s were also a period of prohibition. Remember, we have no alcohol for sale, so speakeasies became popular. Famous gangsters made money selling illegal alcohol and gained power. But by the end of 1920, everything changed. Millions of people lost everything when the Great Depression started in October of 1929. Banks failed, people were homeless, and families were torn apart. Let me get down here. Whoops, too far. Okay. The rest of the world also suffered, where are we here? I'll put my mouse right there, from a worldwide depression, and people in most countries did not see a good future for themselves and for their country. Because of this fear of the future, people were willing to listen and be convinced by radical, crazy groups or individuals calling for change. It also helped make it possible for governments to be overthrown by groups or individuals who promised to create jobs for the people and to end the depression, build their military to become a world power again, and promised a bright future for their country. People demanded change, and these people promised to give them change by taking control of the government. These new world leaders were dictators that controlled not only the government, but also the people. They created their own rules and began taking land from smaller countries to get natural resources to help support their countries. Because the world had recently finished the destructive First World War and the worldwide depression, most countries were not able to stop dictators from invading neighboring countries and taking control. Okay, so we're going to define these terms. All right, so I'm going to go over to this one here. Boop. Sorry, my daughter's work is also on the screen. Okay. All right, so anti-Semitism is a hatred of Jewish people. Blitzkrieg means lightning. I spell lightning right? Lightning war, which is using all forces at once to overwhelm. Theater of war, we talked about that already. That's where the fighting happens. Containment, just what it sounds like. Okay, so fascism is an authoritarian government that is based in militarism. Remember that from World War I? And eliminates human rights. Dictators control everything. Okay, appeasement. So what we're going to see is that countries will appease Germany, appease Hitler, and it doesn't work. It doesn't work. All right, Aryan supremacy. This is a Nazi-held belief that Aryans, white Germanic people, are superior to all others. Okay, ration, that's when we limit the amount of something, in this case, food, you can have. And then the Holocaust is the attempt to eliminate all Jewish people. How about the Nazi attempt? The Nazi attempt to eliminate all Jewish people in World War II. Okay. So right here, number 2, we haven't gotten to that one yet, but since I'm on this page, I'm going to write it. It's fascism. Fascism is a political philosophy that gives total power to a dictator, as in Nazi Germany. All right. We got a few minutes. Let's go back to the packet. The causes of World War II. All right. What causes the instability? We talked about this before. We have high debts owed by Germany from that Versailles Treaty. They owe so much money they can't even afford to take it back. High inflation, something called hyperinflation, which means the value of the money was so low that the prices of products increased dramatically. So in Germany, for example, like an egg would cost 5 cents, and then by like the mid 1920s, that same egg cost $8 billion. Like, it's not a joke. 8 billion is the actual number. So people would have to carry their money in like briefcases and wheelbarrows, and you'd have to negotiate prices. Employees got paid a couple times a day. You could walk into a grocery store and the price of everything in your cart could double by the time you left. It was ridiculous. So people couldn't, buying groceries wasn't a very good option. People would burn money because it was cheaper than buying firewood. It was a really hard time. We had high unemployment and, of course, the global depression. Okay, why Germany hated the Treaty of Versailles. Germany was forced to take total responsibility for World War I. This is all review. We talked about this before. Because the Weimar government signed the agreement, the German people did not support them. So the government that was in charge of Germany at the end of World War I signed this, and the people felt betrayed. Germany had high war debts and was forced to repay, and the Germans felt that this was unfair. Okay, people are out of work because Germany could not pay the countries they owed money for. And so most of their factories were turned over to France. And they kicked out the Germans. Germany lost land to Poland, Belgium, Denmark, Czechoslovakia, and Russia. And the League of Nations, which was the precursor to the United Nations, took control of Germany's colonies. The German military was limited, no more than 100,000 men. They couldn't have tanks, not allowed to have an air force, and they could only have 6 ships and no submarines. And we talked about all that when we did the Treaty of Versailles. So fascism, this is that political philosophy. We already typed it in the answer sheet. Your values and beliefs that you live by that gives total power to a dictator, and the people's individual freedoms are denied. So we have Hitler in Germany, Benito Mussolini in Italy, and Hideki Tojo in Japan. And so these are the people that we have in the picture. So let's go back over here. All right, who are these guys? All right, we have Adolf Hitler, Germany. We have Mussolini in Italy. That's that guy right there. And then Tojo in Japan. That's that guy right there. All right, so these are your fascist dictators. Now, Mussolini came to power first, and Hitler modeled himself after Mussolini pretty significantly. Okay, so the powers we're going to talk about, these are the Axis powers that we just listed. So that is Hitler and Germany. That is Mussolini. Oh, I spelled Mussolini wrong. In Italy. And that is Tojo in Japan. Now Tojo, we'll talk about that later. All right, and they're going to fight against the Allies. Oops, spelled Allies wrong. I can't spell today, guys. And that is USA, and the president, let's see, that's Roosevelt. And then we have Churchill. I miss you, Churchill. You're sitting back in the classroom. And that's Great Britain. And then we have Stalin. Oops, Stalin. For the Soviet Union, and he's down here with his mustache, right? Okay, so down there, that's Churchill. Oops, sorry, no, that's FDR. FDR, remember we talked about him in the Depression. Roosevelt from USA. Here's Churchill. My favorite guy from Great Britain. And then this guy down here is Stalin, Joseph Stalin, and he's in charge of the Soviet Union, which is Russia, right? That's Russia. Okay, so we'll fill out these two in a second after we read about it. Churchill, I miss you. Okay, here we go. Now, let's see. All right. Why would people in a country support a dictator? Well, because the people were desperate and they didn't feel like they had a lot of choice. These dictators promised jobs, promised military growth, and economic growth. And they used what's called nationalism, which, remember, we talked about that earlier on. That's that extreme patriotism that is not only about, my country's the best, but my country will crush your country. So there's that negative piece there. And they promised that they were going to gain back their power and help the people. And so people were desperate and they believed it. Okay, we did all this stuff. So I'm going to stop it here, take a break, go to the bathroom, get a drink, and we'll finish this part.